Have you ever gone into a conversation ecstatic about telling someone huge news just for them to show you that they're not really listening or paying attention to you? I'm sure that we've all gone through something like this at some point in our lives. And it's hard to have meaningful conversations when active listening is clearly not present. I think it's extra important that the up and coming generations learn how to actively listen so that we're not just passing each other by. My name is Katie Payne, and I've been studying in a Foundations of Communications class for the fall 2024 semester. I'm also involved in a lot of activities where if active listening isn't present, then things aren't going to go very well. Some of these activities and classes include AP Spanish, show choir, marching band, worship team, and Next Level, which is a youth leadership team at my church for my youth group. Active listening has suffered because of all the distractions surfacing in our world, but it is necessary to actively listen in order to communicate effectively. The first thing to realize is that there's a clear difference between listening and active listening. Anyone can claim that they're listening to a conversation, but it's clear to everyone whether you're actively listening or just going through the motions. You should also know that active listening can come in many different ways. There are a lot of different listening styles, and even though they're all different, it's very readable to everyone who you're having the conversation with, whether you're actively listening or not. Lastly, we should always be trying to improve our listening skills. If we can be the best that we can be in terms of listening, then communication will be accomplished at a much higher level. First, let's talk about the difference between listening and active listening. People often don't know the difference between listening and active listening, but there is a clear difference when having a formal or casual conversation. Active listening has become so rare that people don't realize or care about the difference between the two. People sometimes only listen when they feel it'll benefit them. Instead of having a conversation that will benefit all parties, people tend to be selfish and not really care about other people's thoughts, feelings, or opinions. They also feel like there isn't a difference, and they just go to the type of listening that is easiest for them and only favors them, but we want to make sure that we're favoring everyone when having a conversation. Active listening is a skill that someone realizes it and chooses to master it. Active listening seems more hard than it is to get the hang of. As humans, we are constantly rushing around and worrying more about ourselves than about others. That we don't really care if active listening is present because we're not focusing on others, even though we should be. Once we get in the habit of constantly actively listening, we probably won't be able to stop. It's not something you do naturally. You do have to work at it, and it might take a minute. But if people were natural with active listening, then we wouldn't have all the miscommunication that we have in our world. Next, we'll cover the different type of listening styles. There are 4 main listening styles: task-oriented listening, relational listening, critical listening, and analytical listening. All of these are dependent on a person's personality and worldly views. Having one listening style not the other is perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be something that you're ashamed of. People often think that if you don't fit into a specific social norm, then there's something off about you, or you're different, or you're weird. But that really doesn't have to be the case in people's thought processes. The reality is, people having different listening styles is a very good thing. If we all had the same one, then nothing would get accomplished the way it should. Task-oriented listeners help make sure everybody is getting stuff in our lives accomplished. Relational listeners make sure that everyone has a voice and their opinion is heard. Critical listeners know what is crucial to everyone's successes, and analytical listeners make sure everything gets done in an orderly and well-mannered fashion. People must respect how one another listens, while also making sure that communication is at the highest level possible. While it is certainly great to consider how someone else listens, it's also okay to have questions, but questions need to be asked in a kind and respectful way, just so that miscommunication doesn't occur. Finally, I want to share to you about ways and about improving our listening skills. The more we strive to improve our listening skills, the better our communication will be in the long run. There are certain ways we can try to improve our active listening skills. I think it's hard, and we don't always want it in a conversation, but we need to learn that silence in a conversation isn't always a bad thing, and it could be okay. Sometimes all someone might need is for someone to listen to them. They don't always need and or want your opinion on something, but I think we just struggle with this because silence feels awkward to us and unnatural. But sometimes silence is necessary to a meaningful and good conversation. I also feel like we must know how to handle giving and receiving feedback when in a conversation. If people ask for your advice, it's important to be honest and kind and give it, but it also needs to come in a kind manner. Oftentimes, we're always looking at the negative things in our lives. While it's good to express thoughts on those things, it's also good to look at the positive things in our lives because we're blessed with so much. When giving advice to someone, maybe you should compliment them about stuff they're doing really well, and then if you need to and they want it, give them some feedback on some stuff they can improve upon. We all have crazy things going on in our everyday lives, and that's why we must concentrate on actively listening to everyone around us. It's hard to accomplish active listening when someone tends to not really know the difference between listening and active listening. We have to find out which listening style works best for us and not be ashamed if it's different than our neighbors. I'm glad there are ways for us to improve our communication skills through our active listening skills. And when we feel like we've done our best, that's when our best communication occurs. Active listening has become more rare, but it is essential for our world and have the best communication between people that we possibly can through active listening. Being wrapped up in the craziness in our own lives can prevent us from active listening. But if we can learn to become active listeners just like that, then our world would be a much better place to live in, and miscommunication wouldn't happen as much as it does now.